Hey everyone, my name is Koushik, and I'm here today to talk to you about serverless Jupyter Notebook functions. So, a bit about me: I work at Microsoft on the Azure Cosmos DB team. You can find me on GitHub at KOEK67, and I also have a blog where I write about systems programming, Python, and a little bit of Zig. So, we're talking about Jupyter Notebooks today, and I just want to give a shout out for how awesome they are. They are a great way to take your code and turn it into this interactive document with charts, tables, and other kinds of visualizations. Great for learning. It's got excellent tooling. It's very easy to debug code in this environment. And if you have not used a Jupyter Notebook yet, I highly recommend you try it out. But the problem comes when we want to take our notebooks to production, or really when we want to share our notebooks with anyone in general. The way that you would have to do this is you either can ask the person to download your code and download Python and download all the dependencies that are required to run your notebook, or you can take your notebook code and deploy it as a web service in Heroku or Azure Functions or something like that. But when you do that, you end up losing a lot of the cool things that make a notebook awesome. So what I wanted to do is find a way to bring Jupyter notebooks to production without losing the cool parts about the notebook. And that's what I'm here to talk about. And we're going to talk about Jupyrest. So Jupyrest, it's a Python library that can convert your Jupyter notebooks into serverless functions, essentially REST APIs. It lets you define inputs and outputs for every notebook. And just a little background, this has been something I started at Microsoft, and it's been in production since 2020. And we do have it on GitHub. You can check out the link on the screen there. So getting started is real simple. You do pip install, and then you run this command here to start the web server. All you got to do is give it a path to where your notebooks live. And that's pretty much it. So rather than go through a lot of the things that are already written in the documentation, I'm going to make this talk very demo focused. And if you want to know about how any of the specific features work, I highly recommend you go check out the documentation on the GitHub. All right, so let's take a existing notebook and see how we can turn it into a REST API with Jupyrest. I have a very basic notebook here, and the first thing I'm going to do is to designate my parameters cell. So we can do that by adding this cell tag. This will basically tell Jupyrest that this is where all of our inputs live. So for this notebook, we have one input and its name. The next thing we need to do is to define what our outputs are going to be. So when I mean outputs, what I mean is, think of it like a API response, or maybe like the return value of a function call. So to do that, we will import this save output function from Jupyrest, and then we'll pass in whatever we want our output for this notebook function to be. So once that's done, you can save that. The next thing we'll need to do is to include this config file alongside our notebook. The config file has 3 sections. So the first one here is the ID, which is the name of the function itself. And then we can also define an input schema and output schema. These are written in JSON schema specification, like OpenAPI and Swagger. These are optional, of course, but any well-designed production web API should have a input and output schema for all of its endpoints, so that's why we have that here. Once that's there, we can open up our little web page here. This is actually included with Jupyrest when you install it. And here we can select our notebook and then executed with certain parameters. So I'm going to do PyData Ohio. Oops, my bad. PyOhio 2023, like PyData as well. So we have that, and let's submit the execution here, and I'll show you what we get back. So execution's finished, and we get two links here. The first one is the HTML. So let's take a look here. This is the executed notebook in HTML form. We see here that our input parameters have been converted into a code cell and injected into the notebook. So, that means that our notebook is now using name with the value that we passed in, which is nice. The next thing we'll look at is the response. And so this is actually the API response for this notebook. And you can see here that we have this output object here. And this is exactly what we sent in through that save output call in our notebook. So whatever we put in the save output call will show up here. And there you go. We've basically turned a Jupyter notebook into a REST API just with that. Another cool thing that you can do is if for whatever reason you have a some error in here, like a key error, then when you execute the notebook, you'll get the failure, of course, but you can also view, instead of having to wire up any kind of telemetry or logging system, metrics, Prometheus, all that stuff, you get that stuff for free because I see the notebook's failed, and then I just have to open the notebook by getting the HTML output, and I can see the error here right in my notebook output, which is nice. So next, what I'm going to do is take a little bit of a more involved notebook and show how we can turn that into a notebook function. So I've taken this portfolio analysis notebook here from this GitHub repo. It does some cool stock analysis here, and it's got some graphs and charts. So when we take a look at this notebook, I've made a few changes here. The main one being that when I've defined my parameter cell, I've actually defined it using a Python object. So the input to the notebook is actually a Python object. It's this portfolio object here that has a start date, an end date, and some holdings. Plain old Python object. And then in our config file, what I have done here, I don't have an output, so I don't need to specify an output schema. The ID is portfolio analysis. And for the input schema, I'm actually referencing something here. This is described more in our documentation, but basically what I'm doing is I'm referencing the schema of a Python object in my code. And this is helpful because when you have lots and lots of notebooks, you often want to share input and output schemas across those notebooks. And so this gives you a way of actually using your code and using it to define your function definition, your notebook function definitions, which is a great way to make scalable notebook development here. So that's what I've done. Now that I have that, let's go ahead and execute this notebook. So I've selected portfolio analysis here from the top, and I'm sending in my own parameters. It's basically the same as what I've done in the notebook, but I've just made Apple half of my portfolio because I'm really smart at trading stocks. So let's execute it. Actually, instead of waiting for this, I have, oh, actually it's done. Let's take a look at our HTML because that's really where the cool stuff is. So what you can see here is this cell here. This is where these are our injected parameters. What you can see is that our request, our input here, which is JSON, has been automatically converted into Python code using the Python class that I wanted to, in our notebook. which is fantastic because I don't have to deal with JSON serialization, deserialization, or anything like that in my notebook. My notebook can be written without any knowledge that it's being used as a REST API. So this is a cool feature of Jupyrest that has been very popular at Microsoft when we have so many different notebooks that we're trying to deploy and run. But it lets you, it lets you use plain old Python code inside your notebook. And then from a client perspective, you can call these notebook using your own HTTP client using straight JSON, and everything in the middle just works as is. So that's pretty much all I had for my talk here. I wanted to say thank you all for listening and coming and attending PyOhio. It's been a lot of fun. You can find me on LinkedIn here. And again, this is the GitHub link to the code here. And yeah, go try it out, install it. Let me know if you like it. And yeah, have fun writing those notebooks, everyone. Take care. Bye.